My name is Simone Carter, and for a long time I thought God had given me the kind of marriage that people like to brag about without even trying. I didn't set out to be that woman, the one with the steady husband, the two children who respected her, the home that felt like love had been poured into its foundation like concrete. But somehow, over 23 years, that's what I became. If you're listening to this story right now, drop a comment below and tell me where you are listening this from. This would help us build a strong community of story lovers. Andre was a plumber. Not because plumbers are particularly romantic or because there's something inherently noble about fixing pipes, though there is a certain kind of integrity in the work, but because he was the kind of man who believed in solving problems. When something broke, he didn't call someone else. He learned how to fix it. When our daughter Nia came home crying in 8th grade, he didn't tell her to just get over it. He sat with her for 3 hours while she talked. When our son Malik struggled in math, Andre, who had only a high school diploma and plenty of his own insecurities about numbers, sat down with him every night until they both understood it together. Andre had hands that had been scarred by work, small white lines across his knuckles, calluses thick on his palms, nails that never quite came clean no matter how hard he scrubbed. But those hands had held our babies the moment they were born, had tucked Nia's hair back when she was 5 and had a fever, had gripped mine when we were told we couldn't have any more children after Malik. We lived in a quiet suburb of Georgia, the kind of place where the houses all looked like they were designed by the same person with a moderate imagination. Brick, 2-story, 2-car garage, a small patch of lawn that required Sunday morning mowing. The neighborhood was the kind where people waved at each other but didn't ask too many questions, where good things were assumed to happen to good people, and if something bad occurred, it was whispered about but never fully acknowledged, as if ignoring it might make it contagious. I was a nurse. I'd worked in emergency rooms for most of my adult life, which meant I'd learned to keep a part of myself apart, sealed off, untouchable. You have to, when your job is to move through other people's traumas like you're wading through water. You see a child who's been hit by a car, you see an old man having a heart attack, you see a woman who didn't make it, and her family standing in the waiting room trying to understand how she was alive an hour ago, and now she's not. If you let that live in you, if you carried it all home, you'd be a ghost within a year. But Andre made it easy to come home and feel human again. He'd have dinner waiting or he'd order something good, and he'd ask me about my day in a way that meant he actually wanted to know. Not the clinical details, but the emotional truth. "You sound tired," he'd say. And I'd tell him, and he'd listen, and somehow just the act of saying it out loud in a space that felt safe would make it lighter. We met when I was 21, fresh out of nursing school, working my first real job at a hospital in Atlanta. He came in with a friend who had fallen off a ladder and broken his leg. Andre sat in the waiting room wearing a work shirt covered in dust and soot, fidgeting with his hands, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. When I came out to give an update, he asked me 3 questions about his friend's condition with the intensity of someone who actually cared about the answer, not someone just trying to be polite. 6 months later, he asked me to dinner. 5 years later, he asked me to marry him in the most Andre way possible, practical and honest. We were sitting on the hood of his car, watching the sunset, and he said, "I want to build a life with you. I want to know you're going to be there when I'm old and falling apart." No fancy ring. He slipped a simple band onto my finger and said, "We can get something fancier if you want, but I wanted to use my grandfather's gold." That was Andre. Always asking, always making sure, always the kind of man who seemed to understand that other people's feelings were just as real as his own, and therefore just as important. We had Nia first, a girl with my dark skin and Andre's thoughtful eyes. Then came Malik with more of Andre's temperament but my stubbornness. The house filled up with the noise of living, Nia's friends traipsing through the kitchen, Malik's soccer trophies lining the shelves, the sound of my voice calling out homework deadlines, and Andre's laugh when someone made a joke at dinner. If I'm being honest, our marriage wasn't perfect. Andre could be stubborn about money. He believed in paying cash for things and couldn't quite shake a Depression-era anxiety about debt that had nothing to do with depression and everything to do with growing up Black and watching money disappear like water through fingers whenever white people decided it was time to squeeze. I could be sharp when I was tired, saying things I didn't mean because exhaustion sometimes came out as anger. We fought about small things. I wanted to paint the bedroom a warmer color. He liked white. Nia wanted to go to a private school, and we argued about whether it was a good idea or whether we were trying to escape something real by chasing something that wasn't ours. Malik stayed out too late one night, and Andre and I couldn't agree on whether grounding him for 2 weeks or a month was appropriate. But underneath all of that, underneath the small irritations and the normal friction of two people living in the same space, there was a foundation, a kind of knowing that we were on the same team, that whatever happened, we would figure it out together, that our love was the kind that had weathered things. It had survived Nia's teenage years, when she went through a phase where she hated us for no reason. It had survived Malik's anxiety about school. It had survived my mother's death and my complicated grief. It had survived the year when Andre's business went through a rough patch and money was tight, and we had to cut back on restaurants and entertainment. I believed, with the kind of certainty that only comes from living inside something for a long time, that our love would survive anything. I was 38 years old, and I thought I knew what my life was going to be. It happened on an evening that was, in every way, ordinary. I was rinsing dinner dishes, letting the hot water run over my hands while the kitchen radio played something soft and unobtrusive. Nia was upstairs doing homework. Malik was in the living room playing a video game, the sounds of gunfire and urgency drifting into the kitchen without quite penetrating my awareness. Andre had left that morning for a job across town, a new client, a big house renovation that he'd gotten because the owner had known someone who knew someone. He'd kissed me goodbye, told me he'd probably be late, asked me to keep some food warm if I could. That was the last conversation I had with my husband. Don't keep some food warm, just I love you, and him saying it back, the sound of the garage door opening, the rumble of his truck, and then he was gone. The phone rang at 7:47 p.m. I remember the time because I looked at the clock, some habit of nurses, documenting things, treating time as information. The voice on the other end was official, bureaucratic, the tone that people use when they're delivering news that doesn't fit neatly into any category that's comfortable. Is this Miss... Yes. This is Officer Michael Delgado with the Georgia State Police. I'm calling to inform you that there's been an accident. We have a vehicle registered to Andre Carter involved in a collision on Highway 41. The words became static. My hands were still wet. Water was dripping onto the tile floor. I couldn't make myself turn off the faucet. Instead, I just stood there, listening to words that felt like they were coming from a television in another room, about another person, about another life, a truck, a collision with another vehicle. Andre had been taken to Grady Memorial Hospital. There had been significant trauma. I needed to come immediately. Did I understand? Did I have someone who could drive me? I heard myself ask, my voice sounding hollow, like it was coming from inside a tunnel. There was a pause. The officer didn't answer right away, which meant no, or meant we don't know, or meant something worse. We don't have that information yet, ma'am. You need to come to the hospital. I hung up the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't ask for directions. I just pressed the button on the phone and it disconnected, and I was standing in my kitchen with wet hands and the radio still playing, and the awareness that I had been on one side of a line a moment ago, and now I was on the other side, and there was no going back through. Nia found me standing there. She was 15, old enough to know that something was wrong, not old enough to know what she was looking at. I called Andre's brother. I called my neighbor. I made a sound that wasn't quite a word, and the next thing I knew, I was in a car, and my neighbor Marion was driving, and the hospital signs were coming toward us, growing larger, until we were pulling into the emergency room parking lot where I worked, the place where I'd delivered countless pieces of devastating news to people just like me. The universe has a sense of dark humor. They took me to a private room, not the general waiting area. The private room, which I knew from my years in nursing, meant they were preparing me for bad news. A doctor, not someone I knew, thank God, because I couldn't have borne the familiarity, explained that Andre had been hit head-on by another vehicle. The other driver had blown through a red light. Andre's truck had taken the full impact. He'd been airlifted to a trauma center, but his injuries were too severe. He didn't survive transport, the doctor said. The words were gentle, but they were also words I'd heard him say to other people's families. Words I'd watched people fail to process for several seconds as their brains refused to attach meaning to the sounds. We're very sorry. Is there someone we can call for you? I remember thinking how strange it was that everyone asked that, as if having someone present could somehow change the facts. as if Andre being dead was something that could be made better by proximity to people who loved him. I asked, "Not right now. There will be procedures, the medical examiner." I didn't see Andre for 18 hours. By the time they brought me to him, his body, I should say, because the thing that was lying on the table in that cold, quiet room was no longer my husband, he had been cleaned up, arranged, made to look peaceful in a way that the moment of impact hadn't been peaceful at all. They'd covered the worst of the damage with a sheet. His face was intact, which I was grateful for, though I wasn't sure why. As if his face was what I needed to remember him by. As if I wouldn't carry the weight of what I didn't see more heavily than what I did. I pressed my forehead against his and tried to will the world back to 7:46 p.m. If I could have that 1 minute back, 1 minute, I would tell him something more than to keep food warm. I would tell him I loved him more than I knew how to say. I would ask him to be careful. I would ask him to call me when he got there. I would ask him not to take risks. But you don't get that minute back. The funeral was 6 days later. The whole neighborhood came. People I hadn't spoken to in years. My colleagues from the hospital, some of whom I hadn't even told that Andre had died. They'd found out through the rumor mill, through the kind of news that travels fast in tight communities. Nia wore a black dress and didn't cry. She went still instead, the way some people do when they're trying to hold themselves together. I watched her across the room and felt something inside me split open. She was losing her father. I was losing my partner. But she was losing him without the years, without the decades of knowing him that I had, without that foundation. Malik cried. He was 16, and he cried at the gravesite and didn't seem to care that people saw it. That was Andre's influence, the belief that your feelings were real and honest and worth letting other people witness. I didn't cry at the funeral. I cried later, alone, in a way that felt like breaking. But at the funeral, I was the strong one, the nurse. The woman who understood death and could therefore handle it. The woman who had to be present for her children while her insides turned to ash. The world doesn't stop when your husband dies. The bills keep coming. The house still needs cleaning. Your children still need dinner and homework help and someone to sign permission slips. The cruelty of it is that grief doesn't care about logistics. It doesn't wait for you to have time. It just moves in and squats in your chest, and you have to keep functioning around it. I went back to work 3 weeks after Andre's funeral. The hospital offered me 3 months off. I took 3 weeks because sitting in the house made everything worse. At work, I could focus on other people's pain. I could be useful. I could move through the emergency room like I was supposed to be there, because I was. The moment I stepped into that building, I had a role, a purpose. At home, I was just a widow learning to do all the things Andre had done. Pay the bills, take out the trash, fix the water heater when it started leaking, call people to do things I couldn't fix myself. Nia withdrew further into herself. She stopped bringing friends over. She spent most of her time in her room, door closed, the sound of music leaking out underneath, but nothing else. I'd knock, and she'd let me in, and we'd sit on her bed, and she'd rest her head on my shoulder, and we wouldn't talk about Andre. We'd just sit. Sometimes that's all you can do. Malik threw himself into soccer with an intensity that worried me. He went from being a decent player to being almost driven, staying late for practice, working with a trainer, analyzing games like they were tests he was failing. I asked him once if he was okay, and he said, "I'm fine, Mom, I didn't need him to explain that he was trying to be the man of the house, trying to do what Andre had done for all of us. The trying was already visible in the tenseness of his shoulders. Money became a pressure I hadn't anticipated. Andre had left insurance, good insurance, but it wasn't enough to change our lives. It was enough to make sure we could stay in the house, that we could keep the utilities on. But it wasn't enough to replace the presence of someone who knew how to fix things, who could troubleshoot a problem and save us the money of calling someone else. When the air conditioning went out in July, I had to call a repairman and pay $600 because I had no idea how to fix it, and Andre hadn't had time to teach me. I was angry at him for that, in a way I wasn't proud of. Angry that he died without teaching me how to maintain the house. Angry that he'd taken for granted that he'd have time to pass on his knowledge. Angry that he'd left me alone with this responsibility. The anger faded eventually, replaced by a dull ache that I've learned to live with. The way you learn to live with a scar, you know it's there, but you stop noticing it all the time. By 6 months after Andre's death, I'd settled into something that looked like stability. I was working full shifts. Nia had unfrozen slightly. Malik's soccer season had ended. We had a routine, which isn't happiness, but it's a place to stand. It's not falling. I stopped at a restaurant one evening after a shift, not because I wanted to go out, but because I didn't want to go home. Sometimes grief is like that. It's not that you're avoiding home, it's that home is where all the absence lives. The chairs at the dinner table are empty. The sound of Andre not coming through the door in the evening is louder than any noise. It was a decent place, nothing fancy, the kind of restaurant where I could sit at the bar with a menu and no one would bother me. I was exhausted, the kind of tired that makes the world feel slightly pixelated, and I was planning to have something to eat and then go home and sleep. The man who approached my table introduced himself as Darren Whitlock, and it took me a moment to place him. Not because I didn't recognize him, but because seeing him in this context felt impossible, the way it feels impossible to see your high school teacher at the grocery store. Darren Whitlock, a name from the yearbook, a face from the hallways of Northside High School almost 20 years ago. He'd been, I tried to remember, not popular exactly, but present, always trying to be part of things. He'd asked me out once, I remembered suddenly. It was junior year. He'd walked up to me at lunch and said something like, "We should go to the movies sometime," in a way that made it clear he'd rehearsed it. I'd been kind about my no, or at least I'd tried to be, but I'd been dating Andre at the time, and I was already in love, the way you can be in love at 17, completely and without reservation. Darren had handled the rejection the way some people do. He'd nodded, said okay, and had become somehow less present after that. You don't notice someone not trying anymore until they've already stopped. By senior year, I didn't think about him at all. Now here he was, 20 years later, with a suit on that probably cost more than I made in a month, and smile lines around his eyes that suggested he'd learned how to take joy somewhere. Simone? He was already sitting in the other chair at my table, as if I'd invited him. I can't believe it. I made small talk with him. What else could I do? He'd already sat down. He told me he'd gone into business, started his own company, done very well for himself. He asked me what I was doing, and I told him I was a nurse, and he asked about family, and I found myself telling him about Andre, about the accident, about 6 months of learning how to breathe around the hole in my life. He listened in a way that felt different from the way most people listen. Most people, when they hear that your husband has died, they offer condolences and then try to move the conversation away from death as fast as possible, as if grief is contagious. Darren didn't do that. He leaned forward slightly. His eyes stayed on mine. He asked questions. He asked about Nia and Malik. That's incredible. He said it in a way that made me believe he meant it. And just like that, something inside me that had been locked down, my need to be seen, to be cared for, to not have to be strong all the time, cracked open a little. He asked for my number. I gave it to him, and he texted me that night, and the next day he called, and within a week we'd had dinner. Not at a restaurant. He wanted something more private, he said. He came to my house, and he brought wine and flowers, and he sat with me in my living room, and when I found myself tearing up about how hard everything had been, he reached over and took my hand without making it weird, without turning it into something romantic when I wasn't ready for that. "You don't have to be strong right now," he said. I believed him. Darren became a fixture in our lives gradually enough that I didn't notice it happening until it was already true. He was there for Nia's birthday. He came to Malik's soccer game. He helped me interview contractors when the roof started leaking. He made me laugh, which I hadn't done in what felt like a long time. He made me feel like a woman, not just a mother and a widow and a nurse. When he asked me to marry him, 9 months after we met, I said yes. Nia was less enthusiastic. At 16, she developed a sharp eye for fakeness, and there was something in Darren that made her suspicious, though she couldn't articulate what. She was polite to him, but there was a distance, a reserve. I asked her once when Darren had stepped outside to take a call. She thought about it. "He's nice," she said finally, "but he watches people like he's calculating something." It did make sense in a way, but I explained it away. People who've done well in business develop habits. They're always reading a room, always thinking about angles. That wasn't the same as being a bad person. Malik was more openly welcoming. He missed having a man around, I think. Someone to throw a football with, to talk to about things he didn't feel comfortable saying to me. Darren was good with him, patient, interested, the kind of man who didn't make Malik feel like he had to be anything other than what he was. The wedding was small, just family and close friends. I wore a white dress because I wasn't sure what else to do. A widow marrying again doesn't quite fit the traditional narrative, but a white dress felt honest somehow. A new beginning, even if it wasn't a first beginning. Darren promised to take care of us, promised to treat Naya and Malik like his own children, promised that we would never have to worry about money again, and for a while it seemed true. Darren's house was bigger than ours. His company was successful, doing something in real estate development, though he didn't talk about it much in a way I could understand. He treated Nia and Malik well. He helped Malik with his college applications. He listened when Nia talked about her concerns, even when they were teenagers' concerns about friends and boys and the weight of the world. When he offered to hire both of them into his company, it seemed like an act of love, a way of helping them build careers, of passing on his success. They can work entry-level positions, he said. Nothing fancy, but they'll learn the business. They'll understand how things work. I was so grateful for this gesture that I didn't question it. I didn't notice when he started making excuses about why I couldn't visit them at the office. Or rather, I noticed, but I accepted the explanations he provided. They need to know they're standing on their own merits, he said when I asked if I could bring them lunch one day. If you show up, it blurs the lines. It made sense. I'm keeping them separate from you because they need space to become adults, he explained when I asked why I didn't see them much anymore. Trust me. It made sense, and I was tired, and I wanted to believe that Darren knew what he was doing. I wanted to believe that he had their best interests at heart, because if he didn't, what did that say about my judgment? What did that say about my ability to protect my children? It was a Tuesday evening when Nia called me. She was 19 at this point, technically an adult, working at her stepfather's company for about 8 months. I was at work when my phone buzzed with her name. "Hi, baby," I asked, using that tone mothers use, the one that tries to pack comfort and concern into 2 words. There was a pause, not the normal pause of someone just gathering their thoughts, but the pause of someone trying to decide whether to speak. I felt my stomach tighten. "Mom," she said, and her voice was different, thick, like she was crying or about to cry. "Nia?" I could hear her breathing in and out, struggling. She started and then stopped. "You can tell me anything," I said. "Are you hurt? Are you sick?" "I can't talk about it," she whispered. "I'm sorry, I needed to hear your voice." "I'm here," I said. "I'm right here." "I have to go," she said, and the line went dead. I called her back immediately, straight to voicemail. I called the house. Darren answered, and when I asked to speak to Nia, he said, "She's resting. She had a long day at work. She's probably just stressed about something. Let her rest." But she wasn't fine. I could hear it in those few moments of her voice, in the sound of something breaking behind the words she couldn't say. That night, I lay in bed next to Darren, and he slept peacefully while I stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what my daughter couldn't tell me. I went to his office unannounced. That's what mothers do when their children are in pain and won't explain why. We show up, we demand answers, we stop being polite and start being fierce. Darren's office building was one of those gleaming affairs, all glass and steel, with a lobby that echoed and a security desk where I had to sign in. The guard looked at my credentials, a hospital ID badge, which was the closest thing I had to official identification at that moment, and waved me through. The office was on the 14th floor. Efficient, organized, exactly what I would have expected from Darren. I rode the elevator up with my heart doing something strange in my chest, and when the doors opened, I walked out with the clear intention of finding my children. Neither of them was in the obvious places. The reception area didn't have them. The open office space with dozens of desks didn't have them. I opened it. Malik was inside, a mop in his hand, wearing a uniform that said maintenance on the pocket. The bathroom, because that's what the room was clearly being cleaned. Malik looked up, and his face went through several emotions in rapid succession. Surprise, embarrassment, something that might have been shame. He said. I asked. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it was coming from someone else. "It's part of my job," he said, and he was lying. I could see it in the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes, in the way he gripped the mop handle like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He swallowed. I don't know, Mom. I left him there. I'm ashamed of that, but I left him there, and I walked through the office like I owned it, opening doors without knocking, looking for Nia with something close to rage building in my chest. I found her in a private office on the far side of the building. The door had a lock, which I thought was strange for a company office. I tried the handle and it was open, and when I pushed inside, Nia was there, sitting at a desk, and Darren was standing very close to her, his hand on her shoulder in a way that felt possessive, that felt wrong. "Oh," Darren said, seeing me. "Simone?" I asked. Nia flinched away from his hand. Her face was pale, and there was something in her eyes, a look I'd seen in patients in the emergency room. The look of people who have been harmed and are trying to survive it. "I'm just reviewing some files with your daughter," Darren said smoothly. "She's doing great work." "Let's go," I said to her. "Get your things." Darren's expression hardened. "She's my employee." "She's my daughter," I said. Nia stood up quickly, maybe too quickly, and grabbed her purse. She didn't say anything, didn't look at Darren, didn't defend him or herself, just moved toward me like I was a life raft and the waters were rising. In the car, she didn't speak, not at first. We drove in silence and I took her home, not to the house I shared with Darren, but to a hotel, paid for a room with a credit card, and told her to rest while I sat in the lobby and tried to fit the pieces into a picture that made sense. It was there, in that hotel room with my daughter asleep in the other bed, that I understood, not everything, but enough. Enough to know that whatever was happening at that office, it wasn't what Darren had said it was. I hired a private investigator the next day. His name was Tom Becker, and he came recommended by one of my colleagues at the hospital who'd used him in a divorce case. Tom was tall, probably in his 60s, with a face that suggested he'd seen the worst of people and had decided to be unsentimental about it. "I need you to find out everything about my husband," I said, and then I corrected myself. "Stepfather, my stepfather." Tom listened. He didn't ask me many questions, which I appreciated. He just listened and took notes and promised me he'd be thorough. "This is going to take time," he said. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of me going back to the house, acting normal, sleeping in the same bed as a man I was increasingly certain had done something terrible to my children. 3 weeks of watching Nia flinch whenever he came home. 3 weeks of Malik going through the motions of being alive, but not actually being present. When Tom came back with his findings, he came to my workplace. He handed me a thick folder and said, "There's a lot here." I read it standing up. Darren Whitlock had been in my high school class. I'd known that. What I hadn't known was that he'd been obsessed with me in the way some boys are obsessed with rejection. He'd built his company, yes, but more importantly, he'd built a life that was designed to win me. The money, the suits, the charm. All of it was part of a performance. All of it was a means to an end. That end was revenge. Darren had orchestrated the car accident that killed Andre. Tom provided evidence, carefully gathered, though not all of it was admissible in court. He warned me. There was a witness who'd seen Darren's car near the intersection that evening. There were phone records showing that Darren had been communicating with the other driver. Most damningly, there was a text exchange from Darren's second phone, a burner phone, the kind of thing people use when they want to hide, that discussed the operation in explicit terms. "Get the truck at the intersection on Highway 41 at 7:30. Make sure he dies." The other driver had been caught. He was already in prison serving a 20-year sentence, but he'd never given up Darren's name. He'd been paid enough to stay silent, and apparently, the money had been worth more than his freedom. Then there was Malik. I read the documents about my son and felt something inside me shut down, go cold, become something capable of harm. Darren had hired Malik into the company with the specific intention of degrading him. The bathroom cleaning job, the refusal to let me visit, the careful isolation, all of it was designed to break Malik's sense of self, to make him feel less than, to make him lose confidence, to hollow him out. And then there was Nia. The folder Tom handed me included photographs, not from the office. Tom had been careful about that, but he'd hired someone to follow Darren, and there were images of him with my daughter. His hand on her in ways that hands shouldn't be. The two of them alone in his car. The door to that office locked from the inside. Tom had also found communications, messages on encrypted apps, things Darren thought were hidden, but Tom had a contact who knew how to find hidden things. The messages detailed Darren's abuse of Nia. They talked about her submission. They talked about his right to her, his ownership of her, his ability to do whatever he wanted because her mother was too blind to see it happening. I don't remember much about what happened next, to be honest. I know I confronted Darren. I know I told him to get out of the house. I know I went to the police with what Tom had found, though I also know that much of it was inadmissible, gathered without proper warrants, in ways that made it tainted. But I also know that the police took Nia's statement. I know they got her on video, describing what had happened in that office. I know they looked at my daughter, my baby, with the particular gentleness that people reserve for survivors of the worst things. Darren was arrested. He went to trial. He hired a very expensive lawyer who argued that the evidence against him was circumstantial and illegally obtained. He argued that Nia was a young woman who developed feelings for him and was now, having been rejected, making accusations. The judge didn't buy it. When the jury came back, they convicted him on multiple counts: sexual abuse of a minor, child endangerment, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. The additional charges, the murder of Andre, took longer. The other driver, faced with the possibility of more time, finally agreed to testify. He told the court that Darren had paid him $200,000 to cause an accident, to make sure Andre didn't survive. He detailed the plan. He explained that Darren had been waiting for years to find a way back into my life, and Andre had been an obstacle. He told me, the driver said on the stand, that the woman, Simone, had rejected him in high school, and he never got over it. He said he'd become rich, become successful, become everything she should have wanted, and then she went and married some plumber. He said he had to fix that. I sat in the courtroom and listened to my late husband's death explained as part of a revenge plot designed by a man I'd tried to help. I sat there and felt something I'd never felt before, the weight of all the choices I'd made that had led me to that moment. Saying yes to Darren at the restaurant, believing his stories, letting him into my children's lives. Darren was convicted on all counts. He received a life sentence plus 25 years. When the judge read the verdict, I felt relief, but it wasn't clean. It was mixed with guilt, with rage, with the certainty that no amount of prison time would give Andre back his life or undo the damage done to Nia. Nia needed therapy, good therapy, the kind that costs money and takes years. She needed to learn how to exist in her own body again without shame, without the feeling of violation. She needed to understand that what happened wasn't her fault, wasn't something she'd invited, wasn't a reflection on her judgment. I couldn't give her those things directly, but I could pay for them. I could sit in the waiting room during her sessions and wait for her to come out. I could listen when she wanted to talk and be quiet when she didn't. I could be present. Malik struggled differently. He felt like he'd failed to protect his sister. He felt like he should have known something was wrong and should have done something about it. He went through a period where he was angry at everyone, at me for marrying Darren, at himself for not seeing what was happening, at the system that had let a man like that operate for so long. As for me, I had to reconcile two incompatible truths: that Andre's death wasn't my fault, and that I had made the choice to trust Darren, which had put my children in danger. I had to learn to live in that space between blame and responsibility. I see a therapist too. Once a week, I sit in an office and talk about how hard it is to trust again, how hard it is to believe that I won't make another catastrophic mistake, how hard it is to be a mother who is supposed to protect her children and who failed them. My therapist asks. I pause. Nia's right, I say. He did seem to be calculating something, she told me. By telling myself that I was being paranoid, by telling myself that he was a good man trying to help. That's not failure, my therapist says. I'm not sure I believe her, but I'm learning to sit with not being sure. Darren's company was seized, his assets were frozen, and through the maze of civil suits and settlements and legal procedures, I was awarded half of his business holdings, his property, his accounts. It was a decision the judge made because restitution had to mean something, and it did. It meant I could pay for Nia's therapy indefinitely. It meant Malik could go to any college he wanted without worry. It meant I could leave nursing if I wanted to, though I haven't. I've gone back to work because nursing is what I know, and it feels important to me to stay connected to helping people, even if I can't protect them from everything. 3 years have passed since Darren was imprisoned. Nia is 23 now in college, studying psychology because she wants to understand what happened to her and help other people who've been through similar things. She still has bad days. She still flinches sometimes. But she also laughs and goes on dates and is building a life that belongs to her. Malik is in his second year of business school. He's thought a lot about what happened, and he's determined to build something ethical, something that actually helps people rather than exploiting them. He's the kind of young man who thinks about integrity in a way that suggests he understands what the loss of it costs. I'm still a nurse. I'm still living in Georgia, though not in the house I shared with Darren. I sold that place as soon as I was able to. Couldn't bear to stay there. Couldn't bear to be in the spaces where he'd moved through our lives like a virus. I date sometimes, carefully, with all my initial instincts running constantly. I trust my gut now in a way I didn't before. When something feels wrong, I listen. When red flags appear, I don't explain them away. Andre's name is on a plaque at a community center in our neighborhood. Nia and Malik put it there. Sometimes when I pass it, I stop and think about him, about how his death was supposed to be a tragedy that would break us, and instead it became the hinge point of a different kind of life. Not a better life, I'd never say that. I'd trade everything for him to be alive, for him to be here, for the years we were supposed to have together. But the life we're living now with each other, having survived something that would have killed some families, is real in a way that takes my breath away sometimes. I've learned that revenge doesn't feel the way movies say it does. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like relief, which is quieter and harder and more complicated. It feels like the absence of the threat, which leaves you with the absence itself. The space where your husband was supposed to be, the space where your daughter's safety was supposed to be guaranteed. I've learned that justice is also quiet and also imperfect. That Darren in prison doesn't undo what he did, doesn't answer the question of why my family was targeted, doesn't give me back the version of my life where Andre is still here, where Nia was never touched by violence, where Malik never had to clean bathrooms to survive. But I've also learned that surviving is its own kind of victory, that raising children who've been broken and watching them heal is enough, that building something new, even when you're not sure you want to, even when you're terrified of getting it wrong again, is brave. Darren is in prison. He'll die there most likely. He'll have the rest of his life to think about the revenge he carried for 20 years, about the way his obsession with something he couldn't have in high school led him to destroy everything he touched. And I will have the rest of my life to rebuild, to trust again, to believe that good things can happen to good people, not as a guarantee but as a possibility. That will have to be enough.